workshop on Social LCA, and with me here in the chair I have Kosara, who will help out, this is the program we have lined up. Actually, the idea for the workshop comes out of a review which we're doing at QSA, the section in Management Engineering in Technical University of Denmark. And we are very fortunate to have three speakers who will introduce each of the questions lined up here. Catherine McComb from France, Julie Perron from Canada, Alexandra Sagmani from Italy. Just to stimulate the discussion, and let me say that in doing this review in the small Social LCA group at my section, I mean, we have discussed certain what we would mention as serious doubts and problems in the current state of art of social LCA literature. Of course, we acknowledge the tremendous work which has been done and which is being done at the moment, but still we feel there's reason to raise some serious questions, and this is what we have tried here. So let me just introduce briefly the first question, which are the relevant and significant social impact in the life cycle of products and services. And sorry. No. Yeah, I mean, there's a basic point that social impacts in product life cycles are very important, and it has been so for a very long time since the first division of labor. And this is just one indication here, the Silk Route and the whole concept of value chain built upon Wallerstein's work on world systems, global commodity chains. So this is one important point as point of departure. But then I think there's a serious point, and that is there seems to be when we discuss concepts of poverty, human well-being, there's a sort of a north-south divide where we, as it was mentioned this morning in the sustainability workshop, seems to talk about poverty when it's the southern countries' essential needs, while in our part of the world it's about welfare. That is one issue. The other issue is that the culture specificity of concepts of human well-being. And then the basic question, this about the three-pillar concept of sustainability. Is it valid? Is the social dimension sort of a similar kind of dimension as compared to environmental and the economic dimension? Or rather, as this figure indicates by the OECD, do we need to have a model of an interaction between the social system and the ecosystem? So these are open questions. The next one, what kind of decisions to be made by whom can be supported by an assessment of social impacts in the life cycle of products and services? Yeah, first of all, we have to remember that, of course, social impacts, it's all about politics. They're contested all the time by the stakeholders in ways which are much more fierce, you could say, as compared to environmental impacts. One particular issue, so that calls for a participatory approach, which has already been suggested in some of the literature at a certain level of the social life cycle assessment. Then there's a particular issue which we've discussed in our group concerning the South. how do you do? I mean, let's say we have a situation where a company is providing, setting up a production facility, providing jobs, incomes, etc. Then child labor is highlighted as a phenomenon involved in that production facility, and then a cut and run situation might occur. Then how do you assess that? I think you need to know a lot about the context, which cannot really be captured by Social LCA as it is, because in that context, I mean, once there's unemployment, a job is taken away. I mean, you need to look at the total livelihood strategy of those households affected, and this figure here is just one indication I mean, because we have the informal sector, we have small scale, medium enterprises, etc. That there's a lot of things to consider. Then there's another issue, and that is, I think you can say, it's fair to say, and it has already been mentioned by Greg Norris, that Social LCA is piggybacking corporate social responsibility. But that refers to the first phase of CSR, that of compliance, where CSR is a cost to the company. What is happening now, which is indicated in this figure, is that at least for some companies, mostly bigger companies, but also for some small, there's a move towards strategic CSR, where CSR becomes a driver for innovation, becomes integrated in the business model, becomes a point of departure for new business opportunities, as compared to compliance, where it's a cost and taken care of by the communication department. And further, Michael Porter, the American management guru, has conceptualized this as a move from CSR to what he called shared value, corporate shared value, that this turn towards global social challenges, I mean, might be one of the avenues for capitalism to sort of reinvent itself. So again here, CSR concerns become a driver for innovation and for development of new business models. And just to give one single example, this is the Danish company Novozymes. I think many of you know about their key competence in enzyme technology. And this is a project, maybe it's difficult to see it here, and we have limited time. This is a project in Mozambique where they use this core competence as a point of departure for doing a very comprehensive integrated development effort, doing something for the farmers producing food commodities. Some of them goes into the production of bioethanol. Some of them are further upgraded to provide added value to the farmers. The bioethanol replaces the use of charcoal in urban households, which cause indoor pollution. So, I mean, from these core competences, there's an expansion in the perspective and a constructive, proactive, CSR-driven development effort, which is very different from just complying with standards and regulations. Yeah, and then the final question, is there a future for Social LCA as a clone of LCA? And our sort of constructive answer is that, as it has already been pointed out in the previous session, that definitely there is an opportunity to develop something on occupational safety and health, because there, in not all, but in many sectors, you can make strong links between materials, processes, and working conditions. So this is one option to build on the strength of the life cycle perspective as such. And the other thing I think is that I mean, LCA and Social LCA has a particular responsibility, because LCA points to re-engineering of processes of production and consumption, etc. And all these changes have social impacts. Recycling systems, asking consumers, households to sort their waste, ask them to come back to the supermarket, to bring back their packaging material to IKEA, etc. All this changes our behavior and have social impacts. So I think you could say that it should be a first responsibility of LCA who is setting in motion all these changes, then also to assess the social impacts which follows from those changes. All right, so I have been speaking enough, and now I give the floor to our first presenter, which is Catherine McComb, and giving your take on the first issue. Yeah, and I think you should use this one because we're doing a recording. So.
Thank you very much. This is nice. Like this? No, on the other side. Ah, yes. Okay. I would like someone to. No, it's not mine. Mine is. This one. Thank you. Okay. And if you can launch this one. Okay. Is it right? Okay. Thank you very much. So the presentation is only to launch discussion with everyone. So my task is to make teasing, okay? Specific teasing. Because the question, the very profound and deep and philosophical...
Sorry, just to help
yes,
you with this.
It's a new cap. Very elegant.
I think it goes like that. You can just fit it yourself.
It's like a crown.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So the very strange question is, which are the relevant and significant social impacts in the life cycle? Okay, so to try to answer, I just had a look at the proposals of researchers from the start of Social LCA until now. But to organize what social researchers suggested as to be social impact, the nature of the social impact, I suggest to ask for help Aristotle. Everyone knows Aristotle, of course. And Aristotle told us that for sure, he's dead, that there are three sources of argument, only three sources of argument in life. When you discuss with people and that when you want to convince them of something, when you want to set legitimacy of something, there is only three sources of argument. One source is pathos, emotion. You know, it's a bit difficult to use pathos in science, in technique, in practice. So we eliminate pathos. But maybe someone could suggest some nature of impact legitimated by pathos. So we keep only the two other sources of legitimacy, which is logos, which is science, in fact, theories, and ethos. Ethos is common behavior, is what people think it has to be, okay? So, to make a classification of the different proposals by social LCA researchers, we get the first axis. The first axis will be either they suggest something from logos, theories, small or large theories, either they suggest something from ethos, and so they ask stakeholders, or they ask to the bakers, or they ask to someone, but they ask, okay? And we need another horizontal axis, because we prefer to put the different suggestions on a map with 2 dimensions. And so the horizontal axis is quite obvious, because some researchers want to suggest something very general, which could be applied in many, many situations, and some other researchers are only interested by very specific contingent situations, okay? And with crossing both axes, from Aristotle, not me, from Aristotle, here is the result, universal contingent approach, logos, theory, ethos, asking the stakeholders or the bakers or someone. And for instance, here we have the international laws, Millennium Assessment Goal, European Commission strategy for sustainable development. It's more or less universal. International laws are the more universal. And to set up this nature of impact, we ask the stakeholders, maybe countries when it is for European Commission. And there are, in the work by Labuschagne and Brent, we could find common paths of international certification schemes. So it's quite general, but less general than the rest. Down, for instance, Louise Camilla Dreyer from DTU used in one paper one certification scheme about child labor, less general, okay? In the C-balance method, we had a look at the C-balance method in the presentation by Andreas Siros in the former Social LCA session. It's less general, more and more contingent. We can ask the baker, like done by, in the work by Cruz about salmon fish industry. And on the other side, we can just have a look at the number of jobs. This is something, we said the theory that what is worth in the social world is the number of jobs created or destroyed, okay? But maybe it's more general to look at the occupational health, like in the work by Hofstetter and Norris, or what Arto Huuskanen presented this afternoon is occupational health. The theory is what is worse is occupational health. Then could be maximizing the sum of the individual utilities of capacities or capabilities. And when Andreas Jorgensen suggests this morning, it was this morning, yes, that what is worse is alleviate poverty and to keep the level of the different natures of capitals, we are exactly in this framework. And maybe what is worse could be human development in general, human dignity, and of course the Princep paper from Bovedema about well-being, or the happiness and dimension of life by Claudia Reitinger, and all just published in January 2011. Yes, make a picture. So just to have just to start the discussion, because of course this is not a comprehensive figure. I forget a lot of suggestions, but there are a lot. I just would like to have a look at two very different frameworks, one universal and from theories, and the other contingent and asking the stakeholders. So the next slide is about the nature of impact suggested by Claudia Reitinger, and the next slide is about the indicators in C-balance, to make the contrast. So Claudia Reitinger used the work of the Australian philosopher Finis, which is quite close to the suggestion of Nussbaum that we discussed this afternoon too. And she suggests that the dimension, the impact are the changes in dimension of life from Finis. You see? She doesn't say that we can assess it easily. She said that our work must be to be able to assess this kind of change, the change in life, the change in knowledge and aesthetic experience, the change in work and play, in friendship, in self-integration, self-expression, and transcendence. Okay? So this is one first example of the nature of impact. And on the other side of the general map, we could find the C-balance proposal with 6 categories of impacted people, It's not stakeholders, and it's the people experiencing the impact. And for each of one, they suggest nature of impact. So now, this is very easy to find, everything is published. Now it's up to you. You have to decide, and I suggest you to think about, could we set rules to decide when do we need to suggest this nature of impact or another? Because with the map, I guess we have, it's not comprehensive, but we have all the categories of suggestion we could find for the nature of impact. So the issue now is, how do we set rules? When do we need to use the right part of the map, and when do we need to use the left or the down part of the top of the map?
Yes, thank you very much. Let's hear some response, some reactions to Catherine's presentation here. I'm very interested. Yeah? Yes, please. Let's say your name first.
Oh, I don't know. I guess the reason why I'm being placed up there in the left top corner there is that we're dealing with lifecycle assessment. And the only way we can work with lifecycle assessment is if we have something that we can aggregate over the whole life cycle, over thousands of processes, and data that we can actually collect and quantify over the entire life cycle. We have seen today some wonderful examples, I think, of qualitative studies where you have made literature studies about mobile phones, for example. I think that was really nice to see how you can make what we back in the early 90s called produktlinjenanalyse, where you make big books about how to make a mobile phone and all the processes involved and so on, descriptive. And you can do that, of course. But the question is, as a decision maker, how much worth is it to have a long description of all the improvement possibilities everywhere in my life cycle? Because in principle, my life cycle is all processes in the whole world, more or less. So the reason we need to be in that top left-hand corner, in my opinion, is that that's the only way we can have something which is universal. And that's what life cycle is about. And which is based on something which can be aggregated. If you're on the right side, every LCA will have to develop its own methodology, its own impact scores, its own, and well, it's doable, but it doesn't give us much efficiency in comparing products, thousands of products, millions of products in a very short time.
So you suggest a first rule to choose, which would be we need something universally efficient and universal.
Yeah, more comments, responses.
Just a little thing that maybe is important because we can ask different questions, and maybe for comparing, I don't know, different systems or yeah, for instance, comparing to have labels or so on, it's important to have something universal. But and we can answer specific questions in this way. But we may ask, we may answer other questions having less universal, more specific tools.
Okay.
So
yes.
My suggestion is that it depends on what we want to answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
In general, I agree with you, because only if we are on the left side we can compare different studies. But at the other hand, we really have the problem that if we are, for example, talking about reuse, how can I show the benefits, the social benefits from reuse, if I'm only working with this left side? Because it's not possible. There are other categories. If I do reuse in Europe, there is no child labor affected, for example, but there are a lot of other social impacts affected. And therefore, if we want to show such social benefits or burdens, I think we have to go to the right side, and perhaps we should discuss if there could be two social assessment methodologies, the more global one and the other one. And here I'm also, that's the point where you are very, very correct. If we then have hundreds of thousands different social assessments on the right side, it's no use. It's only the use for one single study. So which categories should we use on the right side? This is the problem.
I think we also think we have to be on the left side, because I think asking the stakeholders is problematic, as all stakeholders cannot be asked. For example, future generations are hard to include, and also other. If you make asking the stakeholder is really demanding task to really ask all the ones that are affected if you have a global supply chain. So I think we need to be on the left side.
The idea I have, I agree with you if we look at Social LCA as a good analytical tool, but if we look at it from the angle of a good decision-making tool, maybe in some cases being able to aggregate all the results on a functional unit might not in all cases be a good thing to do. So it's something to explore, but the first idea I have, it's maybe a difference. Maybe Environmental LCA is a good analytical tool and a good decision-making tool in the same format, but maybe it's not the case for Social LCA, but it's just an idea.
Be careful.
Just a short remark. I guess the real issue is LCA always the best tool to use? I think if LCA is regarded as the only tool, then obviously we have a problem. And I think that some of the tools which are not LCA, there it would be perfect to be on the right side. But when you're talking LCA, we are talking about thousands or millions of products and processes. And that's why for LCA, it's nice to be on the left side. I mean, it's a question of choosing the tool and choosing the point to be depending on the tool. And the point is that LCA cannot be everywhere in this figure here.
All right, I think we move on to the second question, because I think it ties very well in what kind of decisions we make by who can be supported by the life cycle products. This is purely apparent, which will stimulate the discussion here.
Oh, but it's open down there. Thanks. So, first, thanks for inviting me to share a few ideas, but I'm not really sharing ideas. I'm just opening questions for you to answer, or try to. And, okay, so the question I started with, what kind of decision to be made by whom can be supported by an assessment of social impact in the life cycle of product and services. So first, okay, I took the liberty to change a little bit the question, and it's in part, like to change a lot the question, no, just a little bit. And it's in part motivated by Jorgensen's paper that always point to the ultimate goal of social LCA, which is to improve social conditions. So I changed the question for what kind of decisions to be made by whom can lead to actions improving the social conditions, and can social LCA influence these decisions so they reach this goal more effectively. So it's quite a big and complicated question, so I subdivided into 4 questions, which I hope will help to stimulate the discussion. So what are the actions that can improve social conditions in the product system? Under which assumptions these actions could foster the mechanism one expects will improve the social conditions? What kind of decision can lead to the actions fostering this or those mechanisms, and who can take these decisions? And can a product angle or a life cycle thinking influence the decision so it can more effectively lead to the right actions? I'll just give few pieces or partial answer to the first 2 questions, but I'm not saying that they are right answer. It's just ideas. So I'll count on you after to discuss those pieces of answer. And I'll raise some sub-questions for the 4th question, because I think that the 2 first ones are necessary. Well, we need to discuss the 2 first ones to be able to determine what kind of decision social LCA could support. And the 4th question is, are we really talking about social LCA? So maybe we'll have debate about that. So yeah, it is the unique features of LCA, as said by Finveden, that's the unique features of LCA is the life cycle thinking. So is it relevant in those decision context? So the action that can improve social condition in the product system, I took them from the social LCA literature, looking at the different inventory indicators that are proposed. So it's very not an exhaustive list. It's just idea of a bit how I build pieces of answer for this question. So to have a better product system, so better social LCA result, we could substitute enterprises to include in our system the one that has better practices. So better practices that are expected to lead to positive impact or less negative impacts. Reducing the use of suppliers' services for suppliers associated to practices leading to negative impacts. So if those practices are somehow connected to the functional unit, we'll be able to see it in the social LCA result. Substituting input or product, so closer to LCA, to call up, I mean, I wasn't sure about the English for that, but to call up to have industries and sectors in our product system that are less dangerous. Same thing with the reduction of the use of those inputs or products. And having enterprise modifying their behavior to controlling our own enterprises or influencing the ones that are in our sphere of influence. Different mechanism allowing an improvement. So two are from Jorgensen paper, change in production to modify the number of workers that are exposed to different enterprises. So the idea of displacing the labor for the worker and other stakeholders to experience or to be exposed to best practices. Change in enterprises' behavior to more direct change. And just, I think it's logical since we have inventory indicators that looks at variable that would change between sectors or industries. So maybe the same idea of changing production to modify the number of workers exposed to different industries. So those are among the probably numerous mechanisms that are expected to improve social conditions. So under which assumption the different actions would foster those mechanisms? So we would need substitution to create a change in demand that it's big enough to result in a change in production factors. So for the change for displacing workers or the labor from enterprise or industries that doesn't have good practice or are dangerous to industries that are less harmful or enterprises with better practices. So we have also an assumption saying that maybe substitution can create a market incentive, or maybe reduction could create a market incentive too. And I'm pretty sure that there's other different assumptions that we could put there. So social LCA applications, which I think that are the decisions we're talking about in the questions. So I'm just putting there the one that I comment for LCA and social LCA according to the UNEP-SETAC Guidelines. So it's up to us to see which one could best serve or to lead the actions that would improve the social conditions through the different mechanisms. And finally, just raising some questions to help answering the last one. Can a product angle or a life cycle thinking influence the decision so it can more effectively lead to the right actions? We need to ask questions as, will an impact ripple upstream? If not, there's no need to have a life cycle perspective. Same thing with the downstream. Is it relevant to identify hotspot over a life cycle perspective? So if I find out that I have an hotspot downstream, but that I want to substitute my enterprise, but I'm not under a shame of extended producer responsibility, how I can do that? So I would have a life cycle perspective in my study, but the decider couldn't make anything with that. So then maybe the life cycle perspective is not that relevant. And a last question that it's very much discussed in the late papers in Social LCA, do we need an attributional or a consequential modeling? So I'm not saying that one is more LCA than the other, it's just requirement for the tool. So this is what I thought could maybe stimulate the discussion. And, yeah.
When we start Social LCA in our team, we faced exactly this question. What kind of decision to be made by whom? Who could be interested by Social LCA? And I would make a testimony of our answer. We thought that it was a method that policymaker would ask only after economic, technical, and environmental studies first. It means that it's so heavy, so long, so costly, so fuzzy that maybe you implement social LCA between 2 or 3 alternatives when you are sure that these 3 alternatives are correct from the economic, technical, and environmental point of view. For us, it was difficult to implement social LCA at the start or at the same time that environmental or economic study, because it's very easy to make a business plan in economy. You take months and months to make social LCA. So our first idea was that it was for after some other studies, and as it lasts some months, we need to use it for products which are not changing even each year, or even so for permanent products. And so our ideas was that either it could be agricultural product because they remain the same all the time, or it could be for quite permanent product. And maybe for us, the baker would be state or supranational institutions, or it would be sectors, food sectors or banana sectors with very large chains with impact, because the risk is to make an assessment, and when you stop the assessment, at the end, you report the result about one product, and this product has already been removed from the market.
Yes, I always compare to food safety. I mean, traceability in food chains is being done. It's also difficult. It's also costly. But I mean, you need to do it, and I mean, here public policy development is just one item among so many other items. It seems all this is supposed to be driven by the private sector and consumer pressure. I mean, it's important to, as you raise, what is the role of government? I mean, when it comes to food safety, we give priority, I mean, political priority to that. So it's the government imposing a ban when food safety is compromised. And we have a system where we can trace back exactly that lot from that landing site which contaminated our food chain. So in that case, it is being done. So, I mean, my question here, all these activities, I mean, what is the influence on policy making, on lawmaking? I mean, now we just heard the opening lecture on what is going on in EU. There are product policies on certain products already. I mean, more is coming, I guess, as they're looking for a harmonized way of assessing both environmental and social impacts. So I think that is one important area where we had to address also the application in government policy. Yeah. And
again, I would like to stress that LCA is not really a tool that can handle everything. And when we look at the social impacts and quantify them globally, we discover that the far largest part of social impacts are governance issues. They have nothing to do with life cycles of products or companies. They're basically determined by bad governance. And the question is, of course, we are dealing here, maybe when we're talking LCA, we're talking about 1/10, maximum 25% of the total social impacts that we can influence through product chains. And the question is, of course, how do we deal with the governance issues? Can we make an LCA of governance? I think we can, but nobody has done it so far, right? That's a challenge. I'd like to see a PhD or two on that.
On this, I think we can move on to the third question. Is there a future for social LCA as a clone of LCA? And that is Alessandra Sagmani, who will stimulate our discussion there.
I'm not sure it works.
No. Yes, can you hear me? Okay. I did my homework in trying to think about whether Social LCA is a clone of LCA or not. So I've tried to give an answer to this question. So that's just our main ideas and fully open to the debates. So just, I will provide not just some point for the discussion, but I will provide you with my perspective, and maybe it's not the right one, but let's see. So also, following the discussion of this morning and of this afternoon, I would say that for sure, Social LCA is a clone of LCA as it is developed so far, and how it is applied so far. And, well, it's a clone for, I would say, at least three main reasons. First of all, it's adopt a life cycle and a product perspective. And in doing this, it mirrors fully, completely the LCA structure. It's been developed in the same domain of origin of LCA. So we have the same people that develop LCA, develop also Social LCA. So the idea was exactly to mirror the framework. And basically, it's a clone because we need such a type of structure in order to use Social LCA within a social lifecycle assessment framework. So just without, as a first reaction, I would say, yes, it's a clone. And it seems also that the future developments go in this direction. But what kind of criteria should I consider for debating on whether it's a clone or not? So I just starting from analyzing the structure, and I say, well, in order to be in a clone, it needs to be to use the same framework, and we use the same framework as stated in the ISO 1440. Being a clone means using a functional unit approach. It means also sharing the same modeling assumption. So we have a steady state model with linearity at the core. It means also sharing the same type of mechanism accounted in the model. And it means also the involvement of the product chain. So this approach in which I can detect responsibility along the full production chain. And then we will see also, it means also putting emphasis on the role of the decision context. About the functional unit, but if we go into the detail of this different type of aspect that define a Social LCA as a clone of LCA, I would say that we have already the first issue to be dealt with. First of all, it's not clear at all when I apply the guidelines on Social LCA and then apply the pure structure of LCA in defining the concept of functional unit. Because if I strictly follow what LCA says, the functional unit imply a contribution approach. So that means that the impacts are connected to the function delivered by the specific products. That's to say, if I am a company and I produce a component called A, and I have a supplier which deliver me part of this component. And besides delivering these components, my supplier produce also several other products. So what can happen is that my supplier adopt different social behaviors in his product chain. So it could be very good in producing the specific component I need, but it could use, for example, child labor for delivering other type of products. So if I have to apply the functional unit approach, my supplier will take responsibility only for those parts of the component that will contribute to my product. But if I follow the guidelines approach, I have a company perspective. That means that all the impact I take into account are those related to the conduct of a company, so no matter the product. So can these two different approaches stay together? Does it make any sense? The first question. The functional unit has also other effects, because there is a strong link between the social impacts and the context in which they unfold. And when I talk about the context, I mean both the geographical context, but also the cultural one. So, for example, we have saw this morning, and also in the question time by Julie, that there are different purpose and application for social LCA. And one of these could be just to get a label. And if I am, for example, a company which produce car, and the production of the same model of car is done in different places of the world. Clearly, being the product the same, the social aspects are strongly affected by the geographical context in which the production takes place, because I need to take this specificity into account, because different geographical contexts imply different social conditions. But if I want to get a label on my products, and the product is the same everywhere, so I need to refer the overall impact to the functional unit and to calculate an average value. So I make an average of the different socioeconomic conditions. So those specific conditions that would be at the core of the social lifecycle assessment would be neglected. So the relevance of the assessment would be questionable. So how can I assess this change of location considering this situation? Regarding the model assumption, well, in LCA we adopt linearity, but if we and also has been this aspect has been discussed also this afternoon, and I remember the presentation of Andreas Giroux that specifically addresses these points. When we are in social LCA, the linear assumption could be much more tighter than in other methods, because we have, in some situations, we have a sort of thresholds, and which, if we overcome these thresholds, the impact sometimes could dramatically change. And there is not a direct proportion between the functional unit and the impact. Sometimes what is necessary to identify is that an impact exists, and that is enough. So how do we account for thresholds and nonlinearity? Regarding the mechanism, well, in LCA we have a technological model, and environmental mechanisms are included in the life cycle impact assessments. Social LCA mirrors the technological model of LCA, but what kind of mechanism do we have in the impact assessments? I would say that we would need to have socioeconomic mechanism. So normative position and ethical values should be there, should be translated in the impact assessment. But how do we account for them? Regarding the decision contest, this is, to me, another important point for a reason in terms of clone of social LCA and LCA. And also, as has been discussed previously with the previous questions, also in social LCA, like in LCA, the application is strongly dependent on the target audience of the study. So I would say that I can adopt a different perspective according to which the study can be carried out. Just listed some of them. It's not an exhaustive list. But just take the subdivision into a private perspective and the public perspective of a decision maker. I would say that, and I think that this different perspective require different type of modeling. So and the reason why is that each type of question posed by each type of stakeholders is different. So I would say that the producer perspective or the private perspective is something that could be much more aligned with the present social lifecycle assessment, so a company perspective. But if you want to take into account the public decision maker, as discussed before, well, we need to shift from the company perspective to a societal one. And not necessarily this needs to be done by social LCA. The social perspective would be something that considered how the development of a product would affect the social structure. And this is something that we don't have presently in social LCA. But I think that it would be something necessary and relevant in many cases, because a social impact is something that we have whenever we have a product that interacts with the system. And these give rise to consequences, and these consequences reflect social impacts. And we can see this quite well, I would say, in the case of new and pervasive technologies. Well, in which the perspective offered by social LCA as presently available would be quite limited and wouldn't be able to grasp the consequences due to the introduction of new technology into the markets. So, just to close and provide and start the discussion, is there a future for social LCA as a clone? Well, I think there is a future because social LCA is already a clone. But I'm not sure whether we really need a method that mirrors LCA in all the contexts, because presently social LCA is available so far, I think, has a great value when it is used within a company. But it can be considered as a method that could provide the global scope of social dimension within a sustainable development. So a future LCA, which is not necessarily, again, an LCA, something different, should be developed as things to take this global scope. So I would say that with present social LCA, we are in the context of the clone. It's just we need to advance the methodology and to further develop it in terms of including the non-linearity of the impacts, resolve some criticalities, and of course, great work is necessary in terms of data. So a structured data system seems to be one of the most urgent needs. But if we move to the future of social LCA, we move to something that can be considered absolutely a clone of LCA, because we have shifted the analysis to another perspective that is a societal one. And in this case, probably we will need to build up a completely different methods and approach in which we would require probably a broader functional unit, which I think that if I interpreted it correctly, Julie, the definition of the context unit as a sphere in which all the relationships take place could be a good proposal for a big functional, broader functional unit for such type of societal perspective. So this is my interpretation of what being a clone of LCA imply, and what are the main challenges for present social LCA in becoming completely a clone.
Thank you very much, and let's have some comments, responses to To Alexandra. Yes?
Okay, Steven de Meester from Ghent University. I wonder if we aren't overshooting the aim of lifecycle assessment with this. Because inherently, lifecycle assessment, we have the functional unit. We assess a technical system. So a lot of social indicators, they are really not related to the technical system. So in my opinion, like the social security or the amount of parks near a house, that are all social indicators which cannot be grasped by LCA. So what can be grasped? I think that is the question. And in my opinion, there are two things. It's a production chain, so that there are companies in the chain. So what is there? I would say only the working conditions. These are probably the only things, or the most relevant things that we can quantify and which are manageable. And on the other hand, there's the use of the product, which is also a social aspect. But I think these two indicators are most related to LCA and might be most manageable. And the others, maybe we are overshooting the goal of LCA.
René Scheumann, TU Berlin. I kindly disagree. I mean, if you look on the environmental issues, you had this example of the car as a product with different social aspects. The same is for environmental issues as well. I mean, it depends where you start, where you have your production site. You also have different environmental impacts. Right. So I think on that, or from that point of view, these social aspects can be grabbed and should be grabbed in a regional context, the same as it is for environmental LCA. And that's what we're doing. I mean, LCA, we're doing it on a product level. We have different regional databases, and the same should be done also for the social LCA in this case.
Hi, I'm Chalaka from Sri Lanka. I have a little bit different idea on this topic. That is, we've been developing countries. We are quite familiar with the terminology ESIA, not for products, but for the before starting a process. All the countries have the environment regulations on looking at environmental and social impact assessment before starting industry. My proposition is, can't we start SLCA or studies from the findings or outcomes of ESIA and bring their onwards? Because it's a practice, familiar practice for people in those, in our part of the world, and their onwards develop the SLCA rather than starting from LCA platform. Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to answer the question asked by Alexandra when she says, when do we, what can we do when we skip from one place to another at the end of the, yes. For instance, in this year, we publish one paper about one impact pathway, which is called the Preston pathway. I give you an example. The Preston pathway is a mathematical relationship that you can implement in any country of the world, provided the income of people is low enough. So our condition for use of this relationship is to be less than the income of Mexico. Okay? But if you are in this case, you may be in Ghana, you may be in Cameroon, as we implement it in Cameroon, we may be in South Africa and so on. You just have to know the health expectancy of the country where you want to implement the relationship. And you need to know the income per capita, so the GDP per capita of the country. So you need two data which are really easy to find in the World Bank database, for instance. And with these two variables, you introduce them in the mathematical relationship that we recalculate from Preston, and then this relationship provides to you the difference in health for the general population generated by the change in economic value provided by the life cycle chain. There are conditions to stay long enough and so on, but the relationship, if you are in the condition for use, you can use it in very different locations, like if it was global warming or something like that, you know? It's what we try to do. We try to set up relationship that you can use or not in such and such conditions. But we try to make something general enough to be included in a social LCA, like you say something very accurate, I think, that we cannot do anything of social, of course, but we can add some value by suggesting such relationship that you can implement in different places in the world.
My name is Hanna Pihkola. I'm from BCT Finland. I think it's really relevant to consider also the societal perspective in future, because all the social impacts happen in a context. So, and what I've learned from social impact assessment is that a lot of the social impacts relate to people's fears, for example, that what will happen in the future, and these happen before any product is produced. For example, a fear that a factory is built on your neighborhood or a factory is closed in your neighborhood. So these are aspects that perhaps cannot be dealt with in a social LCA context, but should be considered, and there are methods, for example, in social impact assessment and in future studies that could be used for this or in combination. So I think this is really a relevant point.
Maybe I would just correct that. No, I don't think it was blended.
Okay, so
it's more like the idea of it's the organizations that is operating different unit processes.
Okay,
So,
but it was functional because provide exactly the definition of functional unit it was looking. I mean, it was when. Yes, you define it with the perspective of the product chain, but if I take the definition in a broader meaning, a social sphere is exactly a context in which I have a situation characterized by different companies inside, but different relationship between the different components and between the company and the content itself. Exactly.
Just one comment. I like to pick up the information from the one from Gant. I think if you're going for a societal perspective from a social life cycle assessment, then we're really going over the limit of what a social life cycle assessment actually is for. So there are better and other tools available for addressing societal aspects. So then the question is, why is it the future of social LCA? Or why did you put it on there?
No, I fully agree with you. I didn't say that we need to develop social LCA in order to deal with societal issues. What I'm saying that's a future of a life cycle based approach to able to account for social aspects could be the one going in the direction of societal aspects. But I'm pretty sure that it's not social life cycle assessment, the tool able to do this, absolutely. We have, as mentioned before, different methods developed in completely different fields that already fulfill this purpose, which lacks maybe the life cycle perspective. So is the efforts needs is try to identify how we can combine the life cycle perspective with these tools developed in completely different fields. But I fully agree with you, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm Kim Christensen from Danish Standards. I'm actually not sure this is the right time, but I think maybe it is the right time. I was involved in the development of the LCA standards, so the 1440 and 44, in the second round as the secretary of the rewritten. I was also involved in the ISO 26000, the social responsibility, which should actually have been societal responsibility because it covers all of society. And in the ISO 26000, we spent a lot of time trying to persuade people to use the life cycle perspective. And we tried very hard to have the life cycle perspective as an overall perspective. So you could actually put the life cycle as a supply chain or product chain perspective on all the core subjects, on human rights, on labor rights, on consumer issues, etc. We ended up limiting it only to the environmental, because a lot of people couldn't see the life cycle perspective of labor rights or human rights. This is the kind of challenge. So when I go back from the top of the hierarchy of LCA experts, and they tell me they cannot deal with life cycle when we talk about social, I'm in deep shit, or I took a wrong direction, you could say. So please keep on this work. It's quite important. As I said this morning, the challenge from a standardization point of view, but also from the CSR or whatever point of view, is to take the 37 issues on social responsibility of ISO 26000 and relate them to what you're doing in LCA. So we can do that with the 4 issues we have on environment. That's quite easy. But the other ones, how do we deal with them? How do we quantify them? How do we make better decisions on our social responsibility out of our science-based life cycle perspective, etc., etc., etc. The second comment, the first one was the challenge. The second comment is a kind of confusion, because I think a lot of your discussion today is similar to stuff we also discussed in Environmental LCA, the site specificity, that you have some impact categories that change from site to site. Okay, we learned to deal with that. So of course you can do that with the social aspects also. They are different in Congo and in Denmark. So we don't need the same. We can have a site-specific version or factor or whatever. You can do exactly the same with the social stuff. And then the final comment is that we think that we do LCA to support decisions. Do we all agree on that? To support decision. This implies that there is a decision maker. There is an actor. There is a stakeholder. So always you have the stakeholder perspective. You don't need the company perspective or the product perspective, because there's also always a stakeholder making the decision. And they then use this perspective to support their decision. So it's not a fight between the company or the product. It's support for decisions. And LCA is a very powerful tool in decision support. It's not the only tool, as others have said, but it's a very powerful tool. So please save the life cycle perspective.
Yes, thank you very much. And on that note, I think we close the discussion. I mean, from my point of view, the world economy is structured by a network of life cycles, product chains, service chains. They have tremendous impact on the distribution of power and economic resources to various issues, like for what I said. It is part of the responsibility of government, the social impact beyond what is perceived as in the life cycle. But these governments and their sort of actions is determined by the structure of the world economy. So it all ties together. Our well-being is connected to well-being of other people in other places. Okay, now we move to the final item on the agenda, and that is to identify, like we did in the morning, identify items for an agenda of future research. And Kusara has already done a list, so let's take a look at that. From the discussion, and then add in, comment, revise the list presented here. And here we have the key points from the discussion. In which situation is Social LCA applicable? How to address non-linearity in Social LCA? Different modeling approaches depending on the perspective, public versus private, support for decision making. Maybe we should, any comment on this? We need to stress additional points.
I'm just making a summary here of the key points that were raised by different participants. And maybe I haven't...
Drive it's muted.
So here is a summary of the key points that were raised during the discussion and the presentation. And I think maybe we should agree on whether this reflects the discussions that we had, so that we can move further to the research needs that we can identify. The first key point refers to the first discussion question, which impacts do we assess in the social life cycle assessment? And then we had the left and the right side, and then the argument went, do we use LCA approach in all types of social assessment, or is it only the ones that were on the left side of the quadratic system? So this is which goes in the first question. Can we summarize it as in which situation is social life cycle assessment applicable? Do we need to define certain situations in which we have life cycle perspective and other situations in which we do not need to have the life cycle perspective? Anybody to be opposed to that key point? No.
You said that in some situations we need to have a life cycle perspective and in other not?
Oh, this is what I think the discussion was about. If we want to stay in the left side, then this is the life cycle approach, everything is quantifiable. And then if we move to the right side, maybe a life cycle perspective is not necessary. Maybe we can use other methods.
I think the life cycle perspective could be relevant. Maybe it's
in the right
maybe
side
there's a debate about how to solve this.
Okay, so what can be a better expression for this key point?
No, I think it's still good. It's just because you said like a life cycle perspective would not, well, I heard that a life cycle perspective would not be relevant when we were at the right side of, I thought, catchment model, but maybe I'm just confused.
Okay. Okay, so we can still keep the first statement. Then I think we all agree that there is an issue of how to address non-linearity in social life cycle assessment. Also, do we need different modeling approaches depending on the perspective from public or private, whether it's a company or a more society level?
If I remember well, this point was not agreed because there was a comment by, which you say that no matter the perspective, the stakeholder we have to consider, right? So that's
for me, it would be local versus global. That would be more interesting. So do you have the local decision making, then you can involve the stakeholders much more efficiently than you can at the global level. The problem, as Bo said, if we want the global perspective, we need to trust the experts, because we cannot ask the whole world or represent the whole world. Or we can leave it to the politicians. So when the politicians meet in UN, as they did with Rio Plus 20, we can leave it to them to make the decisions. And the decision in Rio Plus 20 was a non-decision. So the politicians are not deciding anything. Unfortunately.
So do we agree on different modeling approaches depending on the perspective, global versus local? Is that more agreeable? Okay, so we change it. And then I guess we can agree that we would like to use social lifecycle assessment for decision making. And it is necessary to take social impacts when making a decision into account. Yes?
It's not for the last point, but maybe for the first point. My apologies. I think the question is not, is social LCA applicable? I think it's always applicable. But the question is, for which points is it applicable? For which indicators is it applicable? But I would say it's always relevant to assess the social impacts in a life cycle level. But which impact can we quantify in a life cycle perspective? So not the question, is it applicable, but how is it applicable? In which point?
I thought it refers to that if we have the life cycle perspective, we try to quantify things. So there are situations in which you can actually quantify, and there are these other situations that you can use other social impact assessment methods that don't necessarily quantify. So that was but I agree with you, maybe it should be made more clear.
Maybe the idea is in which decision-making situation or for which type of application, So I think the question was, but we might have changed it, but in that different decision context, we might need different tools, and when can this tool, when this tool is still a social LCA? That's the question I was raising. So in which situation, so the question would stay correct if you say that social LCA would have one definition and that other tools would be called something else. Or in which situation are different social LCA applicable or necessary relevant, or if we agree that there was maybe more than one type of social LCA.
It goes together with the last one, support for decision making, because that's the same point.
Yes.
When is social LCA relevant for decision making? So the first point is, which are the social impact categories that are relevant for social LCA? I think that's the scientific part of it, and the other part is the decision support part of it. And then it would make sense.
It's another question.
I mean, the question of what kind of tool is applicable to which kind of application is always the question I have to ask myself before I start any kind of research. So I think in which situation is LCA applicable is not kind of a research question. This is the question I have to ask myself, no matter what kind of study do I have to take. So do I make a risk assessment, do I make a life cycle assessment, and so on. So this is kind of not a key point. It's a general question you have to undertake every time for every research, from my point of view.
If I may comment on your remark, that's true. In principle, people should know what the methods is able to do and what is not. But what happens is when you have a new methods, people just apply it to different type of products, system, technologies, whatever, without asking whether it is the right method or not. So I think we need to be clear in defining when we can apply social LCA and when we can't, because we simply don't get the right and the reasonable answer. So the point is that in principle, if you would know exactly what social LCA is able to do, that's fine. But to me, there is still quite a lot of confusion in literature about what social lifecycle assessment can evaluate and what cannot. But maybe just my perspective.
Yeah, I think we need to move on to the final. Yeah, I think because of the time limit, we need to move on to take a look at the final slide, needs for future research. Kusara, if you could move on to that, and then so we can have comments on whether we feel this is the, or at least part of the agenda of future work in this area.
So I try to make a summary of everybody's contributions. Maybe it's not completely correct and does not reflect everyone's opinion, so that's the time to change it. The first point that I think was kind of raised up was to define the cases for application of social LCA. That goes back to our discussion just a moment ago. And is it only the occupational health and safety aspects that belong in the life cycle perspective in that type of assessment? And can there be more than this? And then is it feasible to refer social impacts to specific product groups? Can we take them from that perspective? The other point was to explore the feasibility of adopting a broader functional unit. And then if we use average values for social LCA assessment, how then can we make comparisons of product? Should we use average values for social LCA or should we use more site-specific data? So if anybody thinks that this is not the correct need for future research or should be changed, please. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
My name is Christian Bauer. I'm from a company, and I would like to ask, or probably one aspect helps. What I haven't understood, as I wasn't involved in the discussion, in the environmental LCA, we use claims to be, well, to use it and to pay money for this. So we can say our product is better than the product of somebody else. And we say, oh, what does better mean? It's environmental preferable because we are following latest science, blah, blah, blah. Is there any claim of this for this approach? This would sell a lot. If you could say, my product is socially, I don't know, better? Yes, can you say this? And then you would say, okay, it's accepted by society and science. Is to be socially better already something that sells, that is accepted outside? I mean, environmental preferability is accepted and translated to what consumers would purchase. But I'm not aware, or I'm not familiar with the claims that are supported by social LCA, which could sell equally. So probably this is another idea for being more specific on what actually the message is at the end.
I think that maybe before going, I mean, I think there are some things that come before other things, basically, because I mean, if you can't do basic stuff like, for example, find data on the entire life cycle. Of course, we saw some cases today. I was actually quite surprised, or positively surprised, to see all the work that has been done to actually get data on the life cycle. So I might have to revise my point on this, but I'm not quite convinced yet. So I think still that if we are still in this situation where we can say, well, we are not really sure that we can get data on a life cycle perspective, then I think that everything else is kind of a little bit, then we can always discuss, well, should we do this, or should we do that, or should we blah, blah, blah. but it comes kind of in second row. And here I would say I really disagree with you, Kim, on your comment before, because I think that it might be the case that we are discussing so many of the same things as you did when the LCA discussion started, but I would say that we are in a completely different situation when it comes to social impacts, because at least this is the general understanding in the social LCA community, that social impacts are not related to the nature of the product, but to the conduct of the companies, and of course, you say that in Ghana or Congo or whatever, the example was that the working conditions are different than Denmark. The environmental impacts are different than Denmark. But even though there is the assumption that you can somehow relate the nature of the process to environmental impacts, and if you don't have this relationship, you can't have the same approach to getting data. It's simply not possible. It might be possible to make these risk categories as we have seen today, and there might be some possibilities here that I haven't thought about. So we might kind of get some solutions here, but I think at least solving these kind of fundamental questions about getting data, and I would also, that's my kind of, I don't know the English word for that, but what I think is really important here, ensuring that there is actually some kind of benefit of this. I mean, we can develop all we want, but if we're not seeing any kind of positive social impact of all this work, what's the point? So I think these 2 points basically. How do we get the data? What kind of data can we get, and what types of analysis can we make on this type of data? And then the second point, how can we? In what situations can we expect that this will actually have a positive impact, social impact? Without these two questions being kind of solved, saying yes, this is done, yes, this is done. I find it difficult to see. I at least think that these are very kind of basic things that really needs to be looked into.
Just another practical challenge on this. We are doing a standard in SEN, the European standardization, in cooperation with ISO, so the global, but on sustainability and traceability of cocoa. So the whole idea is to identify issues, criteria for sustainability of cocoa production, and how to show that throughout the supply chain. And also there, I'm fighting very hard for the life cycle perspective. I'm fighting very hard for a scientific approach. And I meet a lot of people, especially cocoa experts, who say, no, this is like work environment, it's totally different. Or it's like social services, it's totally different. Or it's like decision making at Christiansborg, it's totally different. You cannot use it here. We have to develop our own methodology from our own setting. That argument you meet all the time. And I think that the strength of the environmental LCA is actually the LCA, not the environmental. So the life cycle perspective is the strong positioning. And I trust that we can use it. And just to sort of challenge your comment, 10 years ago, toxicity and ecotoxicity was an impossibility in LCA, because there were so many species, and they could be 3 months, or they could be 6 months, or they could be 10 years old in different locations and habitats. Today we actually have a kind of methodology on how to treat toxicity and ecotoxicity. Yeah, I know we don't agree, but I would say, along with Bo, as much as we can put into the methodology of LCA, but not making LCA the decision support tool. There are other tools needed. And from my perspective, I'm pretty pragmatic. Leave all the LCA. Take ISO 26000. Take the 37 issues and work on that. And you can work on that in the supply chain. And you can check on those issues where you can actually improve on labor rights or human rights or whatever. And that would be a much higher contribution to the overall global sustainability, but it might not give as many scientific papers.
No, it's, I thought there was somebody there. Oh, no, it's already done. All right, so then I think it's time to close the session. And I want to thank the presenters. I think we have had a very lively discussion. And we will do both a video report on this, which will be able to yes, and if we could move one slide forward, I think we have another announcement of our next meeting in Montreal. And a few days, a few days after that, there's also an opportunity to meet in Glasgow, where there will also be a session for, maybe it's not in this, if you can move to the last one. This one, upcoming events. So the seminar in Montreal, May 6 to 7, and the SETAC Europe meeting, May 12 to 16 in Glasgow. So let's continue the discussion and do some hard work until we meet next time. Thank you very much.